Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Bridging Impact Podcast, Coach's Corner, where every Friday, Coach for Title myself, I share the wisdom that I'm learning from the week and pass that on to mostly coaches and parents. And with that being said, today's episode is on vulnerability, and I had a great conversation in this week's podcast with Dave Turgeon. Go check it out if you haven't already. And he shared this quote that I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but he works, giving context, he has worked with Buck Showalter, Clint Hurdle, some of the best managers in the game of baseball of all time. And so with that, he also works with some of the best players right now at IMG Academy in Florida, where they literally go to IMG Academy to prepare to go to college, to the MLB. So he's working with top-notch people. And so he gives the context of the players that he coaches right now. They don't care how good he was back in his playing days. They would rather hear about those days where he went 0 for 5 with 5 strikeouts. It shows their humanness. It's real, right? Like, I think sometimes as coaches, we want to share our highlights because we feel like we want to be respected in that regard. Like, oh, when I was a player, I was so good. I did this, I did that. Right? But it's not about that. So I was having a conversation with my girlfriend Addie the other day, and I'm going to simplify it. It doesn't even have to be about this right now. I just asked her, I was like, why don't coaches ask more questions? Why aren't they as curious? Why don't they connect with their athletes as much? And she pretty much just told me it requires them to be vulnerable. And I had a light bulb moment go off at that point. I never thought that, asking questions about other people is vulnerability. But it is, because it requires you to drop your coach, I am always right mask and just be a human. And I think that's one thing that just really hasn't been in sports for the last few decades, and probably really ever until now with this new wave. And I've had the opportunity, and if you get another good podcast is the Flying Coach podcast. It's actually kind of what really got me into coaching and really recognizing the power of coaching. It was with Steve Kerr and Pete Carroll the first season. They had Brene Brown on, and just talking a lot about vulnerability. And it's really actually helps locker rooms. It helps teams. And it just helps people grow and connect together. So I'll share the example from this summer. I think I had the opportunity to direct summer camp. I've talked about that a little bit on the podcast episode. Maybe you're a new listener, and welcome. Make sure you subscribe to the show. That's how you get these every Wednesday and Friday, where we share and pass that wisdom along. But with that being said, I had the opportunity, and every single morning I made sure to say hi to every single player. You can go ask all the other coaches. Nux, high five, good morning. A couple of the older kids, about the 12-year-olds starting to get in that cool stage, you're always saying good morning. And then they're, if you're watching out here on YouTube, they're like, good morning, kind of making a little fun of me. And I'm, at the end of the day, that's great. That's what it's all about. And then I'd ask them, hey, what'd you have for breakfast? And if I knew them a little bit better, some of them were Dodger fans. Hey, you watched the Dodger game last night? Hey, how was, if it's a Monday, how was your weekend? Right? What did you do? Just getting curious. And that's the first step. And it was really amazing, some of the relationships we were able to build. And that's a beautiful thing about summer camp is you're able to have a little bit more of those interactions versus, sometimes when, you're running a team and things kind of move fast. You got to go from here to here. And it doesn't always seem to be time, but we need to make time for connection beyond the game of basketball, beyond the game of whatever you coach, beyond the classroom, right? And it's just what it's all about, right? At the end of the day, it's beyond sports. It's about connecting with our fellow humans. So, and I share that because I saw a kid that at a class that I had really built a really good relationship with. He was awesome. He's probably a camper or a coach favorite of all the campers. And I was like, I won't use his name. You know what? I'll use his name. It's fine. I won't use his last name. I was like, Josh, so good to see you. And he was stoked to see me too. And it's that comes from relationship building. That comes from connecting and seeing him as more than just a little basketball player at camp. I see him as a young kid that's going to go out and be a leader one day. And that's vulnerability, to see people beyond their role, their title. And I want to share, 3 different ways that we can just be more vulnerable in our daily lives as coaches, leaders, and teachers. So Number one is just ask, right? And it's genuinely ask how people are doing. Make space for that. Maybe it's if that hour and a half practice time, your 50 minutes of teaching, whatever it is so important. Just make sure you make time for it, maybe a little bit before, right? And Coach B, Andy Baranilla, if you haven't had an opportunity to listen to that episode, that's a really great episode too. He talks about how in physics department, I think it was every 3 months or every month, he just makes time to like sit down and talk to kids and see how they are. And you can implement that into practice as well. And of course, if you're coaching younger ones elementary, it's kind of a different sort of check-in, right? But like especially middle school and high school kids, like they're going through challenging times right now. I just had an opportunity to work teen bonding the other day for a teen group, and the number one challenge that they had, most of them were freshmen in high school, were making friends. And so just making space for them to talk about that. It doesn't have to be super in depth. It doesn't have to be like a teary-eyed kumbaya. It's just sharing and connecting, right? That's the number one, and that starts with asking. And that kind of leads me into my second point, which is sharing. Share about yourself. Share about your story, and you don't have to talk about every single detail. In 7th grade, I had this for lunch, right? No, of course not. But you do need to share something about yourself that helps them connect. And a big thing that I share, and I think actually ended up being an important part of my story and what I'm doing now, is I was cut from the varsity team my junior year, and I had to play JV, and I worked my butt off to make that team. But that actually made me work even harder the next summer. And I'm able to relate because one of the athletes that I'm training right now, he was cut from the AAU team, and quite frankly, he just probably wasn't ready yet, right? But that's okay because he's a hard worker, and he's going to get back up on his feet and keep moving. And I was able to relate with him because I had that experience. So share those challenges, share your failures. I think that's more important than sharing. I think you can share about successes sometimes, and it you have to read the room, but I think true honest vulnerability is sharing your failures. And then the last one is just owning up to your mistakes. And this is a big one because I see a lot of coaches that they kind of just brush over it, right? Like, like they blame someone else. And this is more than just a coach and teacher thing. This is just a life thing in general. People won't own up to their mistakes. Just own up to your mistakes. Say sorry. Like I know that when I say sorry to kids, or when I say, hey, it's my mistake, I remember this one girl specifically from the Boys and Girls Club when I was working there, she was in 2nd grade, right? She's like, no, you're not. She never heard an adult say, I'm sorry. I'm like, yeah, I was wrong. I was genuinely wrong. So I think just really owning up to it and asking kids for feedback. That's one thing I've been doing lately. At the end of my basketball trainings, when I'm working with kids, I'm like, hey, how can I be a better coach, right? And they look at me like, I don't know. Because they've never been asked, right? As coaches, right, we solicit, we're like, hey, we always want to give our feedback, our advice, but we don't ever want to get advice. We don't want to get, and you don't have to keep it all, right? Some advice a kid may give you, or feedback just may be like, I want to play more games, I want to have more fun, and like do certain things that maybe you can't do, and maybe you can do a little bit of it, right? And again, you can't take everything super seriously, right? And every comment, everything's got to take with a grain of salt. But at the end of the day, you have to give them that ownership over, like, hey, I want you to be a part of my growth. Invite people to be a part of your growth. And I think that's a growth hack, right? It's just like making mistakes and then asking for feedback. That's a big one. So, at the end of the day, vulnerability, again, doesn't have to be I'm a big kumbaya, I'm sharing my full life story, my sob story. No, it doesn't have to be that. It's just showing your humanity. It's taking off the coach mask, it's taking off the teacher mask, and just even sometimes the parent mask, and just being like, hey, like, I was there too. And I feel like I'm not a parent, so this actually probably is harder because I'm like looking back in my high school, my mom was like, oh, I was a kid once and blah, blah, blah. And actually I think that did help for sure. But at a certain point, when you're a kid, you're like, your parents are just like on a different level. Like, they are gods, right? They never make mistakes, right? And so then once you get a little bit older, you see some things differently, and you recognize that they are human. So that maybe not the parent one. We'll put the parent one to the side, but leaders and coaches especially, like, it's really important to take our mask off and just be and be human. So with that being said, that's it for this edition. Please like, comment, subscribe. So hit that subscribe button on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. If you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, if you're on YouTube, smash that subscribe and comment below. Connect with me on social media. Email me back. I really just I create to connect. And I've been connecting with a lot of coaches, a lot of leaders recently, and it's just been, it fills me up. So have a wonderful weekend, and I will be in your eyes and ears next week. Cheers, y'all.